then we're on. Okay.
Again. Oh, okay.
There, when I logged in, when I clicked on the URL, there was a little type your name, and then it said test your mic, and it looked like it looked like it was working. So I thought, okay, it's picking up. But anyway, whatever.
Oh, well, this is so for quite a while we used Google Hangouts.
Yes.
I'm just going to turn this screen off, make myself better, less blue. And Google Hangouts were great. And then, as Google sometimes does, they got rid of it.
Oh, okay. I guess I heard about that.
And so now I've had to do some research to find a replacement streaming service. And StreamYard does a good job, but it's still, we're climbing back on the learning curve again to get back up again.
Yeah.
So Fulco is there, but he is.
Is he muted or?
He said he's going to get headphones,
oh.
And then he disappeared, and he hasn't appeared. Okay. Oh, there's Fulco. So Fulco Mark is here now, and as soon as I added him to the stream, I got sound from him. But for you, I think you turned your mic on and you got feedback. Oh, I can see Mark's wearing headphones.
Yeah, I am. But just because I got 3 other family members and a dog here, so I thought.
Yeah. I took part in a pro conference meeting recently, and it's only like there were 2 kids, both having a lovely time playing the piano, and there was a dog, 6 feet or 8 feet away from the meeting, and I thought that's kind of irritating. Anyway, okay, so it is 7:05. I am waiting for my other presenter, but I don't want to wait too long.
Let's see. I was just checking. It says possibly 6 total people, of which you and Dave would be 2. So then there's really just 3 maybe.
Yeah, I'm waiting for Dave. I did. I moved this meeting to be virtual because I was worried about the weather, and it looks like we got all our weather in the morning, and this afternoon it was fine. It was also kind of disaster recovery planning in the event that we're no longer able to meet at Flight Network, Satchin's company. We may have to go virtual until we can find a meeting space. Okay, well, I think I'm going to charge into my presentation, which will be, which is not going to be very long. Just about dealing with legacy code, which is probably something we've all had to deal with. So, actually, I'm going to try something here. All right, you able to see that?
Yes.
All right. I've got my laptop hooked up to a second screen, and it's gigantic. And so I'm looking. Well, I guess I don't want to do that. So I'm looking at a gigantic image here. Anyway. Oh, and okay. I thought somebody had joined us, but there's my camera and there's also the second screen. All right. Today's talk is learning about mud, which I need to get to the right screen here. All right. Mud. So typically when you're dealing with legacy code, it has a bunch of different names. I've heard big ball of mud. I've heard spaghetti code. Typically you get somewhere and the guy who wrote it doesn't work there anymore. And he had some bad habits. Some code I saw had its own import function, which was hilarious, and it shows you how flexible Perl can be. But it also makes for challenging learning about a module. And I've done this at one startup. We developed a prototype, and then there was no time to actually go back and write it correctly. We just had to basically build a prototype.
Ooh. I'm hearing that buzzing sort of.
And I'm hearing a lot of rushing.
Yeah.
Okay, it stopped. It's like doing a presentation on a subway station sometimes. All right. So this is, I just started a new job recently, but I've done this other jobs where you arrive, but you have to deal with the code, and you have to figure out how you're gonna figure out what's going on after looking through 100,000 lines of Perl code. So you can start at the top and dig your way down, and you can start making your own hierarchy and figure out how all the things put together. That's a bit of a challenge. You can also go to start at the bottom, and again develop an inheritance model, learning about if they're real objects or fake objects, or they've done the auto load thing. Auto load's a very cool thing, but you have to be aware that it's there, and there's some gotchas. The one that comes to mind is you need to catch the terminate function. What the heck is it called?
I don't know.
Anyway, yeah, I put this presentation together in about 2 hours last week, and anyway, it's a little raw.
Don't worry. Don't worry.
What's that?
I said, don't worry. Don't worry. No, no judging.
It's it's the destroy function. That's what I'm thinking of. Yeah, I'll go back and fix this up later. Something that I used in a recent job was look to see how the tests exercise the code. That's really useful because you can see what the code's supposed to do or what it does under test. You can also get a idea of the code coverage, and it's useful to see where which part of the code the tests cover and which parts they don't cover. That'll give you some information. There's something there was a piece of advice that Ovid mentioned a while ago, which was to make the directory layout of the tests mirror the code, so that when you find a problem in a test, you can figure out exactly where the code is that you're testing. And I thought that was brilliant. I suppose another way would be to put the tests in the same directory, but no, that's not really a good suggestion. It should really be separate. I mean, if you're just doing one module, then no, actually, they should still be in a separate directory because you want to have them. It makes sense to have them separate. Finally, in my case, the repo I'm dealing with goes back a long way, and many different systems are run from this one repo. So that's also useful to know. And I'm trying to be a little vague here because I don't want to talk too much about my current employer. And you can talk to the developers. And you know, I should have added, you could talk to the QA people. And I talked to one developer a couple weeks ago, and I said, "Oh, hey, I saw you wrote this back in 2015. I wanted to ask you some questions about it." And he shrugged and he said, "Well, it was 5 years ago." And yeah, that does happen. You write something and you come back to it, and it's like, "Wow, this is kind of cool. Oh my God, I wrote this." And look in the databases. And once you've had a look at the code, the database should make more sense. You can see how the various objects relate. But you can also have problems such as the first point says, the field's Boolean, and then you have the debate about, well, exactly what value is it? Well, you can store a 0 or an N for no. It's all the same, but you can run into problems pretty quickly. Time zone is another one that Ovid talked about. He had some issue where they use different time zones for different tables. If you can imagine how entertaining that was. So the solution is use UTC everywhere. You can always go from UTC to whatever you want your local time to be. But to go from local time back to UTC can be challenging. Remembering how to do a join again. One job I had to jump through a lot of hoops to get access to the production database. And operations is pretty unhappy about it. But really, to be able to look at the production database gives you a much better live view of exactly what's going on. I remember looking at one QA database and discovering, it's about 6 months out of date. We don't do it that way anymore, which was wasted time. And is the back of this, we'll just skip over that last comment. So if you're using the debugger, this is just a couple of points. I know I've had to run CGIs through the debugger in the last couple of months, just because that was the best way to do debugging, and that's pretty handy. And Perl Tidy is also great. Code formatting is a bit of a religious topic for any developer. But I find it really helps me to reformat the code to understand what's going on. I know one thing I've seen recently is they just added an if statement at the top. They had the conditional at the top and the brace at the bottom. But looking at the code, it wasn't clear that it was inside an if because they hadn't fixed the indentation. They just added the top and bottom. So Perl Tidy certainly helps clarify what's going on. But as the second comment says, don't just reformat code. That tends to get you make you unpopular with your colleagues. So what I've done is if I've added a new block of code, I put it in my formatting and go with that. But again, it's a religious discussion, and that it can be a bit of an uncomfortable topic. Even when you're dealing with people who wrote the code 10 years ago and they've improved their style since then, but they still have feel ownership about this code that they wrote but can't remember how it works. And after reading all that stuff, it really makes you focus on doing greenfield development cleanly and consistently, worrying that you have to look at your own code and puzzle out how it works. Somebody very wise once said you need to be twice as smart to debug something as you do to write it. So if you write something that's absolutely brilliant, it's really going to be impossible to debug later on. And of course, when it's your own code, that's even more difficult. And realize when a module is getting too big. And certainly I've seen that. I remember there was one module that was, I'm just trying to think, it was about 60 pages long. And so that was about 6,000 lines. And I've dealt with modules that are twice that size. And it's really unmanageable when you have a module that's 6, 10, 15, 20,000 lines long. And it's just really gigantic. So always a much better idea to make the code modular. And one rule of thumb I've heard is you don't want to have a function greater than 1 page of code. Well, we work with pretty big monitors these days, but that's still not, it's not always possible. So I want to finish with this really interesting article, and I will post this URL. But this popped up on Twitter recently, and there were some really interesting, well, I would say case studies, but they're somewhat case studies where they started with some old code and then they basically re-architected it. And the second one, re-architecting for incremental change, Strangler Fig, is intriguing because what they did was they slowly replaced the old code with a new system that did the same thing and replaced more and more parts of it until eventually the new system was handling everything. And the organization resisted in turning off the old system, so they just left the old system in place. And eventually one day it crashed and no one noticed. So I thought that was a great story. That's my favorite of all of them. And so then they just, decommissioned the system, and that was the end of that. I suppose you'd want to probably keep it around in a version control in a repository somewhere to be able to go back and read some of the old comments. That was great. I think the one that I love is turning everything into microservices. Because then you have a bunch of small services that do one thing very well and very specifically. The tricky part is figuring out the interface between all those things. And that can be a little tricky. Also, what happens when something goes wrong? How do you know which of your dozens or hundreds of microservices have failed? And then managing logging of all those microservices. That can be a bit of a challenge. Anyway, I just thought I'd do a presentation about that, just because I've done probably a third of my career has been looking through old code and understand it and resurrect it and fix it up and get it to and rewrite it. And certainly rewriting it is a very satisfying project. Well, that's all I have from my end. I basically left myself in a position that I needed to come up with a presentation. Sergio was going to be doing a presentation, but then he got very busy with some schoolwork, so I decided to jump in and put something together very quickly last week. Right, let me see what I can get back to here. Stop sharing. There we go. Oh, I can see Isaac has joined us. Hi, Isaac, you're muted right now. So we were supposed to have another presentation at this point, and it was going to be David S. talking about how he used an audio gap to transfer information. So I think he had a work laptop and a home system, and he wanted to get some data over. I think it was like nothing proprietary. I think he made that clear. It was just something useful he wanted to go. But email was locked down, and all the other ways were locked down. So I think he used a speaker to transmit something, and his mic on another system to receive it. And at a very low baud rate, that worked quite well. And I was hoping he would be able to do a presentation on that tonight. And it looks like he has not joined us. So well, that's all the presentations I have. Isaac, I can see camera mic not working. You can hear me. That's good. Can't spell. Okay. That's all I have as far as that goes. On behalf of the Toronto Perlmongers, I've joined a Slash channel with the Pearl Foundation and taken part in one of the meetings. And I don't quite know what else to report about that. Well, it's early days. They're looking for people to host 2021 and 2022. I had planned to put together a proposal to host 2022 to give myself plenty of time, because to put something together in time for the fast approaching deadline, I think that's not going to happen. I think about the deadline, I think is March 1st, which is Sunday. So that's definitely not going to happen. Anyway, they've asked me to help out with stuff for the 2020 conference, and I'm going to be doing that. Yes, I agree. It will be foolish for 2021. So they've asked me to help out with dealing with sponsorships for 2020, which is basically when somebody makes a financial commitment, then I follow up with them and get the money in and take care of all that communication. So that sounds like a pretty lightweight challenge. So I'm going to be taking care of that. It would be great to have the Pearl Conference here in Toronto. It sounds like the Americans, it seems odd to say, but anyway, it sounds like Americans are always happy to come visit Toronto. It's a nice change from visiting another city in the United States. And I think Toronto's got a lot to offer in terms of, things to do in the city and places to eat. So we'll see how that goes. All right. Well, that's all I have for this week. This month. Anybody have any questions for the group? It looks like Mark, you've got an active mic, and Isaac and Focal are only communicating over chat.
Well, I mean, I could pretend that I know what other questions people might want to ask, but I thought that was a very interesting presentation, because I often don't deal in my day-to-day work with other people that use Perl. It seems like everyone loves Python these days. And I can read Python code usually, and I have lots of Python books. And I even did, as an exercise, take my regular workhorse Perl script and completely redo it in Python, just so that I could, put that on my resume and not be lying. And Python's great, but I don't think in Python. I think in Perl. But
yeah, and there's a bunch of Python code. One of the main services that we use is all written in Python. So I've been able to read through it, but I've been reading Perl code for 20 years. So to glance through some Python, I just that's not. But I should definitely do that as well, because I can see that would be useful to be a little bit more knowledgeable about Python. One of my coworkers is also a big fan of Rust, and he's written some interesting code in Rust that lets him launch a whole bunch of SSH sessions at once. Mm-hmm. So we have a variety of hosts at my job, and if we want to go and he wants to go and check all 24 of the hosts at the same time, maybe look to see what volume is mounted and running the executable. He had from a single command line, he launches, boom, all these command sessions, and then is able to type in a command in a central box, and it goes out to all 24 of the boxes and it runs it, and he can do a visual check on all the boxes and see what's going on each box. And that's written in Rust. And he's a big fan. He's also written some stuff in Go, which
I haven't tried either of those. I've heard of them, but I don't.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things, who has time? And I suppose you have time if you're retired, but if you're retired, you don't care anymore.
Yeah. You were talking about code bases and stuff. I was checking a program that I used a couple years ago. It had 10,000 lines of code for Perl, but it used no objects whatsoever. So it was just declarative, or whatever that's called, programming, where you just plod along for 10,000 lines. It was bulky. It works. And it's actually used a lot in my field. But I needed to dig it apart to see, to understand, and there was very, very little documentation as well. So and I everybody's got their own mental process about what they go through when they're programming. To me, I don't. It's not like that I write the comments first, but I write the code. Then I go back and add a few comments saying, well, it's obvious, but here's what I do. But then is it ever useful when I go back and look at my code a couple months later and I go, what the heck is this? Look at the comments and go, oh, that's interesting. Okay, that helps me. Yes.
Yeah. Wow. 10,000 line.
So he didn't make his own modules, and he didn't use any packages at all from CPAN or anything. So it was, and I've seen that before. Actually, I've seen code in my field. It's bioinformatics. So people are processing DNA sequence files basically, and sometimes launching other jobs from inside Perl. I've seen people do things like they use backticks, and they'll cat a file name right into a variable all at once.
Oh,
yeah. Things that could break your system, and that would be it's a hack. It's just someone showed it to them. They knew how to write a Perl script that did one thing, and then they add lines to it like that, and it builds. So it has, they have conditionals, and they have flow, and they have a mastery of basic programming concepts, but it's not like the Perl code you're used to reading, I would say.
Right. And
it's very forgiving.
Another one I can remember seeing recently was my list name equals diamond. So basically they read the entire file into memory, and then they have a for loop that goes through that array, that list.
Yes.
And I think, sure, you can do that until you end up, reading in a 10 gigabyte file and running out of memory. And then you're like, why is it broken? I don't understand.
And then,
it's like, no, that's totally not the right way to do it. These things, I don't know, there are a couple things that are like, you probably learn in your first year or two of Perl, do this and definitely don't do that. And people still do it. But I guess it's because people are still picking up Perl for the first time in 2020.
Is that true? I thought there's all those things online about, which language should I learn? What are the strengths and weaknesses of blah, blah, blah?
Yeah. Or as Isaac says, learning from Stack Overflow.
Yes. Oh, yeah. No, that's also, that's you can learn a lot from Stack Overflow. It's not necessarily a good coding technique, but it can sometimes help solve a problem or answer a question. But
there was even a case recently where something broke recently, and it turned out the programmer had Googled for it, found a post on Stack Overflow, and used that. And that's right. It was something like getting the currently running process, except they'd done it wrong, and so they're getting instead of getting their running process, they're getting the running process for .NET. And since the two products were both using .NET, they both appear to be the same thing. Yeah, there's a log file on .NET. I think Ovid posted about it. He generally posts first thing in the morning on Twitter and with a link to a blog post or a news item, and that makes for interesting reading. Yeah, use the UUID for .NET instead of generating their own, which meant that if you had such and such a driver running, you couldn't also run this game, or there were some, completely unlikely conjunction of events. And it was because somebody answered incorrectly on Stack Overflow and then gone back and said, no, actually, that's wrong. Well, what Google returned was, here's the result. Here's what you should be doing. Anyway,
it's funny.
People do tend to just Google for something and then look and go, great, that solves my problem. They run it, it works, and they put it in, they leave it, they go on to the next thing. All right.
Okay. Well, I think I'm gonna log off then.
Yeah. Thank you all for attending. Isaac Fulco, sorry your audio wasn't working. Maybe next month. And I'll scare up some more presentations.
Okay. Well, thank you for putting one together this week. This
Yeah.
month. I mean. Okay. Bye.
Thank you very much.